Close. That's off Steps Road. Yes. When you get
Serão.
Mikhail? Okay. Greetings to you all, our members across Zimbabwe, the region, the continent, and in the diaspora. Greetings to you all. We are here on a special policy dialogue to mark the second anniversary of the death of the former President, Robert Mugabe. And for the occasion, we have launched a book, Remembering Robert Gabriel Mugabe, Politics, Legacy, Philosophy, Life, and Death. This is the book, and edited by Colin Sabao, Richard Runyararo Mahomva, and Lawrence Mandara. At this occasion gives us also the opportunity to look at ZANU PF during the Mugabe era, post-Mugabe, post the coup, and including an analysis of the current dynamics in the party, and indeed leading to the 2023 elections, if they are elections, and beyond. And to do that, we have first and foremost the authors of this book, Richard Runyararo Mahomva and Colin Sabao, to introduce the book for us. Thereafter, we have commentators who will comment on both the book and also the subject which I've just referred to, looking at ZANU PF, the dynamics, current dynamics, the prognosis of the future, and in the context of the Mugabe era. So, Mahomva and Sabao, hand over to you.
Oh, thank you, good dog. Hello, is it audible?
Yes, very audible.
Yeah,
and very
I was saying, thank you very much, good dog. Allow me also to recognize Dr. Mandara in absentia, fellow editor, Dr. Colin Sabao, staff and friends of Leaders for Africa Network. Also affirming the view that this book launch really represents the mutual institutional commitment of Leaders for Africa Network and SAPE's Trust, commitment to Pan-Africanism, but also remembering that Pan-Africanism as an idea gives room for us to embrace our dissent, and as a common cause of knowledge, you'd also recall that even with its establishment, SAPES has played a very critical role as an intimate watchdog of the dealings of ZANU PF with power through the life and times of President Mugabe. So it is from this perspective that we are quite delighted to be here at SAPES, celebrating our diversity, but also recognizing that as a point of departure, of course, that national identities and memory are a contested phenomena. And even as we discuss the legacy, the philosophy, and the life of Robert Mugabe, the nationalist, we are reminded of the stubborn fact that nationalism is in itself not a monolithic, a linear, and a rigid concept. And therefore, depending on where and when one decides to look at Robert Mugabe, as we have done through the book, Robert Mugabe, the political persona, his memory is predicated on a pivot of nationalism and its binaries, starting with the first binary of the colonial versus the anti-colonial nationalism, the Marxist and the capitalist underpinned nationalism. And you'd recall that even over history, nationalism assumed race, gender, ethnic, and class-defined dimensions. And you'd also recall that even with scholars that have led the way before us, such as Terence Ranger, he wrote on race, on peers and consciousness. And that debate has also been continued by scholars like yourself, Dr. Ibo Mandaza, in the book Race, Color, and Class in Southern Africa. And also Mahmoud Mamdani in 1996 also articulates the issue of subject formation and subjection, which actually represents how colonialism produced natives and how in the process a certain segment of humanity was localized, and out of that process we had the Mugabe generation, the nationalist generation. So against all those dimensions, we see that nationalism remains contested. And also, if you visit works by scholars such as Horace Campbell, they've articulated issues of patriarchal nationalism, and even Gateni also writing about the ethnic dimensions of nationalism. And this, to me, and every other contributor, articulates how nationalism represented a contested realm of everything political. And to this end, the life, the politics, and the legacy of Mugabe must be understood within that perspective. And this is what each and every contributor tried to put across. And the book, in all its chapters, it tries to epocally unpack who Robert Mugabe was. And the consensus amongst the contributors is that his legacy is at the center of all conflict in the evolution and in the aftermath of Zimbabwe's independence. For instance, the formation of ZANU PF in 1963 was in itself conflictual. The waging of the struggle against the colonial regime starting from 1965, coming down to the Lancaster period, also represented a sense of conflict that is associated with the person and the legacy of Robert Mugabe. And after independence, we also noticed 1982 to 1987 coming in the face of our nationhood, that is the Kukra wound, and it's associated with his legacy. And some of the chapters try to give a multidimensional analysis to that effect. But one very emerging point is that the prominent contradiction which characterized the reality, especially the reality of 1982 to 87, was that the search for reconciliation with the former white oppressor was negatively counterbalanced by a raging national crisis, which was directly affecting the African majority. And the colonial powers which were responsible for engineering this civil unrest were quiet about the chaos that was happening, and only to later utilize that in the post-land reform. So what we actually see is the fact that in as much as Mugabe is problematized in many chapters, there is this view that says his inheritance of a colonial state actually had so much challenges to his power. And some of the chapters tend to quiet about the negotiations and also the ramifications of the Lancaster negotiations. And there is consensus, especially as prominently pronounced in a chapter by Obert Mpofu, where he writes about the veneer of reconciliation and the post-war reconstruction that characterized the independent state, and arguing that there was a well-managed flight of capital in the process. At the same time, the Rhodesians were still consolidating the gains of their looting and economic plunder. At the same time, it was also at a time where we saw Zimbabwe being drawn to its early neoliberal, policy architecture predisposition. So all these things, the austerity politics that defined the first decade, we see those issues, defining the Mugabe legacy. And what we have done in this book is that we have not reinvented the wheel, because some of the issues that we raise here, Dr. Mandaza, you'd recall, in 1986, you wrote The Politics of Transition. You edited that book, critiquing the political economy of Zimbabwe at the time, the policy architecture, as if that was not enough. 11 years after our independence, in another co-edited book, the one-party state and the Zimbabwean democracy debate with such corner, you projected those pitfalls. And you'd also notice that in 1992, Professor Jonathan Moyo also came in with a very seminal publication titled Voting for Democracy. And then 1993, The Politics of the National Pace. So we see that there's been a consistent conversation among academics interrogating the organic nature of the national state of the national project in Zimbabwe. And that on its own points to the fact that colonialism as a process was transferred into the so-called post-colonial era, which saw the legacy of Mugabe being characterized by the need to confront the weaknesses of the episodic decolonization. So also at the center of the Mugabe legacy, one comes across the episodic decolonization, which Mugabe had to fight. And how did that emerge? It was through the land reform. And the land reform, as we all know, attracted Anglo-American hegemonic attacks in the form of the sanctions that were imposed on Zimbabwe. It resulted in the formation of a colonially backed opposition in the form of MDC, resulted in the proliferation of regime change driven CSOs and reactionary neoliberal forces. At the same time, also characterized by sanctions that were promoting certain sectorial interests under the auspices of promoting human rights. But at the same time, the academic front was not silent in all this. As you'd recall that the post-land reform period generated a lot of anti-Mugabe literature. And in my chapter, I borrow from Professor Atul Nemachena, who speaks about the concept of the Mugabe phobia, that we had an academia and a certain segment of the CSO sector that he had what he refers to as the Mugabe phobia. And to substantiate that, in 2002, we had a book by Martin Meredith titled Plunder, Power and Tyranny in Zimbabwe. We also had David Blair's Degrees of Violence. We also had Stephen Chan also writing A Life of Power and Violence. We had Andrew Norman's Robert Mugabe and Betrayal of Zimbabwe, Geoff Hill, amongst other contributions. But in 2015, we had a turnaround with Professor Sabelo contributing into the debate by talking about Mugabeism, the book on Mugabeism. So you see that Mugabe has been a consistent feature in the making of Zimbabwean history. And it is from this perspective that we draw our inspiration from the existing debate and producing a new level of debate that we see as a pro-land reform remembering of Robert Mugabe, a more debate pronounced remembering of Robert Mugabe, because mind you, if probably this book was written when Mugabe was still in power, there would have been probably a sense of self-censorship amongst the contributors and even the editorial framework. So against this backdrop, we see this book contributing into the broader debate of the contested national question, and also positing vehemently the view that the national project does not remain a linear process. It's an ongoing process. And in closing, as the editor and the publisher of this particular book, Remembering Robert Mugabe, I see this book as a good start to reframing the true meaning of leadership and governance in Africa. I also see this book as an organic precedent assigning progressive intellectuals to record the political and philosophical path of every African leader from a purely African and neo-colonial unfiltered perspective. This exercise of memory reconstruction, according to me and others, must be pivoted on the sincere will to interrogate the continuities and the discontinuities of the African liberation and African perspective of what leadership embodies in an African context against the forces of global hegemony that characterize the life and the times of Robert Mugabe. I know there is a dominant argument that he stayed in power for too long, quite a very obvious view that we all agree. But in some certain sections of radical Pan-African thought, that can also be equally seen as a way in which he stood against the hegemony of the West. And I think it is high time that he is also recognized from that perspective. And what does that then mean to the beginning, the evolution, and the future of ZANU PF going forward? I think the ZANU PF of today should be able to draw a lot from the virtues of Mugabe. That is to learn from the positives and unlearn from the negatives of Robert Mugabe. And also drawing on the pitfalls of the first decade of our liberation, I think it is imperative for us to understand that institutions such as the IMF, institutions such as the World Bank continue to posit ideas and models that have created ruthless growth across Africa, jobless growth across Africa. And as we are reinventing the future, we need to be cognizant of the founding values of our liberation. And whilst Robert Mugabe had his pitfalls, I'm sure that we can learn a lot of positives from him, but in the process, continue to reinvent the future by speaking truth to power. And I see this particular book meaningfully contributing in that direction. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, Richard. Does Sabao anything to add? Colin? Colin Sabao?
Just a few words, perhaps, Doc.
Pardon?
Just a few words.
Okay, please come in.
Okay, Doc. Greetings, everybody. Perhaps let me first of all begin by acknowledging the many academic luminaries that we have among us.
Can we see you? Is it possible to see you, the camera?
I think you can now.
Okay, that's better.
Yes. Let me begin by acknowledging the presence of several academic luminaries that are amongst us today, some of whom have always existed in my world and my life is some form of heterodox fascination, my desire to be amongst them. Believe you me, in the last 17 years of lectureship, I have been quite comfortable, confident to march to the lecture room, unprepared, ill-prepared, and prepared, and be able to present whatever lecture was required of me. But when I look at the panel of the court of panelists that we have here, who consist of luminaries who perhaps could rightly lay claim to the larger part of the corpus of studies and scholarship on the subject of our text, as well as perhaps the theme of this particular discussion. One is made to feel like is on their first day of university education and can be forgiven for perhaps scrambling around for a notepad and a pen to try and take notes. But I am humbled by the presence of luminary scholars, perhaps seminal scholarship on this subject, including among them Dr. Mandaza. I noticed Dr. Zamchia there, as well as Prof. Raftopolas and Dr. Terence Mashingaidze, among many others. What I find quite intriguing about the subject of the text itself, and perhaps one of the main motivations behind coming up with this particular project, was the enigma that Mugabe is. he remains perhaps even in death as an elusive character, perhaps not very, very easy to capture in one sitting. And his testament to the old African adage that the story of even one man cannot be told in one sitting. This is perhaps one such sitting of amongst many. And as Richard has actually aptly exemplified, the story of Mugabe has received momentous as well as monumental attention from a host of scholarship, whether be it within the media, music, politics, ideology, political science, administration, popular culture, and even in literary narratives. And the chapters that we have in this particular volume perhaps give testament to the multiplicity of images that Mugabe had or assumed, or the characters that Mugabe assumed in both life and death. What perhaps again is quite profound about this particular volume is its perhaps desire to refuse to be held down on one particular ideology, as you shall realize in perusing these particular chapters, that despite that they seem to be discursively discoursing with each other, they also in some way seem to be discoursing against each other, and oftentimes more bound by the contradictions that they actually have amongst them, which then, of course, makes it very difficult to perhaps create a coherent and cohesive theoretical pedestal or standpoint for narrating the very diverse and multiplicity of identities that Mugabe perhaps means or has on each and every one of those individuals. It is perhaps not my goal to summate the contents of the book, but acknowledge and thank the contributors of this particular volume in their very many and diverse views, as well as within their very diverse disciplines. As you shall notice, for example, the whole purpose of the text was to try and, by all means, embed or encapsulate the legacy, the memory of Mugabe within one singular volume. Of course, as I explained earlier on, this is something of a mammoth task. But we hope that as an input or as a contribution to the existing oeuvre of scholarship of Mugabe, this book might actually perhaps inspire more critical thinkings of Mugabe, which would also, in my thinking, refuse to be restricted to ideology and politics. The chapters in this particular text are quite revealing on the responses by each of the individual authors to the very simple question, who is Robert Gabriel Mugabe? And the multiplicity of disciplinary approaches in explaining the enigma that is Mugabe through these particular chapters, from perhaps, for example, understandings or attempts at understanding Mugabe through an analysis of mediascapes of the person, as well as the ideology that Mugabe is, through music, through politics, political administration, through an understanding of the psychology or the psyche of the person that Mugabe was, understanding his policies, especially with regards to the land reform program and its attendant ramifications on perhaps international relations between Zimbabwe as a nation, as well as the global world, as well as the politics that surrounded his eventual ouster from power, and how this is captured and also evinced through the analysis of literary narratives as well as popular culture, actually makes this particular volume quite a very unique interpretation or understanding of Mugabe as both the man and the ideology. And it is only my wish that more and more of such studies of not just Mugabe, but most of our leaders, especially in the process of reclaiming national consciousness, as well as the legacy that characterizes the historiography of African nations is concerned. It is very important that we do as I would borrow loosely from Akeli Mbembe's concept of post-coloniality. We need to reformulate our own African modes of self-writing, trying to understand ourselves from within, as well as how we can then reformulate or formulate these particular understandings into practical future processes that will perhaps guide and develop in the long run, ultimately, the nation state that is Zimbabwe. I thank you very much, Doc, and everybody. And I would like to profoundly thank all the contributors, those who are present and those who are absent, for making this project a success. As well as I would want to thank leaders of African Network, my young brother Richard, to be precise, for also making sure that this dream eventually is realized. I thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you. About before I call our three commentators to join in this discussion, I just wanted to ask the editor, Mahomva in particular, whether, given his role or his work at ZANU PF, whether this book has the blessing of the party or not. Does it reflect the party thinking on Mugabe?
That's a very interesting question. Yeah, but I think the starting point, really, if we are to look at Richard Mahomva, you'd recall, Doc, that Richard Mahomva has got dual loyalties to probably ZANU PF, to put it in your terms, and also to Leaders for Africa Network. So generally, this is a strict Leaders for Africa Network project. And as you know, from the beginning when we established Leaders for Africa Network, where you actually came through as our first keynote speaker for the first edition of the Back to Pan-Africanism conference, our loyalty has been to Pan-Africanism. So coming back to your question, I think my loyalty is to Pan-Africanism beyond partisan institutions, because Pan-Africanism is the mother of all these petty partisan institutional loyalties that we have. So this is a Pan-African project to a Pan-African doyen, with or without the blessing of any political organization.
Okay, that's fine. You made your point. But there's a view among commentators, especially on the occasion of the All Men's anniversary of his death, that perhaps ZANU PF died with him, and that it's being buried now by those who succeeded him, or those who took him out, so to speak. You wouldn't agree with that view, would you?
I think individuals come and go, but institutions and their values are perennial. So the coming and exiting of Mugabe from the political scene should not translate to the beginning and the end of ZANU PF. And you'd also recall that his exit was part and parcel of the internal contradictions that, of course, manifested to the national or towards the national. So the point I'm making is that individuals come and go, but perennial values are what stand in any given institution. I think that level of analysis is synonymous to saying the departure of Richard Mahomva is the end of LAN, or to say the departure of Ibo Mandaza is the end of SAPES. No. Ibo Mandaza, the person may come and go, but Ibo Mandaza, the idea will be perennial, and hence SAPES.
So you are saying, in fact, the legacy, Mugabe's legacy, lives on in ZANU PF.
Mugabe's legacy in Pan-African.
That the import of of the book, that Mugabe's legacy lives on, his philosophy lives on in ZANU PF.
Yeah, certainly. I think it does, though, of course, there are cases where the reinventions of his legacy may erupt, but I foresee Mugabe not dying and Mugabe living forever.
I'll now bring in the first of our commentators, that is Miles Tendi, professor at Oxford, but solidly Zimbabwean. He's done some work recently, the biography of the Solomon Mujuru. And in addition to that, I'd like to say that Miles Tendi and the other commentator who comes in later, Tulani Zamchia and myself, are currently doing a study of ZANU PF, the Mugabe era, the post-coup, and the possible scenarios towards 2023 and beyond. So, but on this occasion, Miles Tendi is commenting on the book. Miles, please come in. How many minutes do you want, Miles?
I will try to be done within 10 minutes, I hope. I'll go as fast as possible. Thank you, everyone, for coming along.
It's impolite to try and prescribe time on professors. So
I will go rapidly. I'll go rapidly.
Okay. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, everyone who's here. And congratulations to the authors of the book. Remembering Robert Mugabe, Politics, Legacy, Philosophy, Life and Death. I will start by saying some positives, and then I will end with a few what I think are constructive criticisms about the book. On the positive aspects, look, in an age in which the agenda to decolonize or decenter knowledge production has rightly come to the fore, making research about Africa by Africans available at affordable prices in Africa is essential. And in that regard, I commend the editors and the contributors to this book for doing precisely that. The editors and contributors to the book are mainly Zimbabwean, thinking and writing about the politics, legacy, life, and death of Robert Mugabe, a figure who has attracted much scholarly and popular attention beyond Zimbabwe itself. It is worth reminding the audience, I think, that there are more books about Mugabe by non-Zimbabweans than there are books about him by Zimbabweans themselves. So the 15 chapters in this book go some way towards advancing Zimbabwean debates or conversations about Mugabe, his life, politics, and legacy. I commend the authors for that. There's some other things I appreciated about the book, reading through it. I think the multidisciplinary approach, you get international relations scholars, media studies scholars, history scholars, political economists, trying to think about Mugabe and his legacy in perceptive ways from within their respective disciplines, making for a rich edited volume that will appeal to readers with diverse interests. I think it's also important to emphasize here another positive of the book is it's really a push to underline the significance of Mugabe as a figure of decolonization in Zimbabwe and Africa more broadly. Even if Mugabe's role in this decolonization process was far from straightforward, far from uncomplicated, and far from unblemished. The third thing I would also, as a positive that I took away was, one cannot write the story of Mugabe without paying attention to the ways in which the West, the United Kingdom especially, contributed to shifting representations of Mugabe. I think the book does lay bare the duplicitous, at times self-interested approaches of Western states that were most comfortable dealing with Mugabe from 1980 onward, despite, say, for example, the Gukrohundi, the early
Busy. See you.
Miles, you're muted. Miles, I can't hear you.
I'm not sure what happened there. Yeah, it took on a more critical stance post 2000. So I think Mugabe is reflecting Mugabe's complex relationship with the world, particularly the West, the UK in particular. It's another strength of the book. The final thing I'll say as strength is that in the book, Mugabe very much emerges as a complex figure who left a convoluted legacy, which I think will take decades to fully untangle. He's at once a compound literary projection, a nationalist who was partly a creation of the colonial project, a misruler, a pragmatist who could be unpragmatic, a hero, a liberator for some, a villain and repressive figure for others. I'm reminded of Walt Whitman's poem, Song of Myself, in which he writes, the past and present wilt, I have filled them, emptied them, and proceed to fill my next fold of the future. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. I think Mugabe contained multitudes. Let me turn now to some criticisms I would like to make. The first one concerns the way in which the book sets itself up is trying to discuss or depict the character and persona of Mugabe at both the personal level and also a political level. And it's thrust that all of these, the personal, the political, cannot be explained from one dimension. So it sets itself as in that way. But yet, after reading the book, what we really get in the end is the political and public character of Mugabe. There is little that is personal in the book. As the feminist scholar Cynthia Enloe reminds us, it's the political thinker Hannah Arendt who insisted that authentic voice and public speech together be seen as the core of any meaningful polity, but dismissed as appropriate only for private discourse. Those matters that contemporary feminists contend must be debated in the public arena if the profoundly masculinist culture of political life is ever to be dismantled. Now, Arendt's approach results in only a partial view of politics. One of the most potent mechanisms of political silencing is dichotomizing the public and the private. And that's what kind of happens in this book. Because when we do that, certain individuals get silenced. Who is silenced in the book? Grace Mugabe, Sally Mugabe, Mugabe's mistresses, and of course, Mugabe's children. And yet the private shapes the political. The individuals who dominated Mugabe's private sphere impacted his politics significantly, but they're absent in the book. We don't get a sense of that. The only time we get a sense of the private interacting with the political is when the book discusses the fall of Mugabe, in which Grace Mugabe is depicted as somehow having played a role in. Grace Mugabe certainly impacted the final years of Mugabe's politics, but she also impacted his politics long before the years of his fall. And I am also not at all convinced that Grace Mugabe was that responsible for Mugabe's fall. Recently, I reviewed Eddie Cross's book about Emerson Mnangagwa called A Life of Sacrifice. I observed that the wives of politicians mattered. In that review, I asked about who Auxilia Mnangagwa is and how she has impacted Mnangagwa's personal and political trajectories. I would ask the same of this book. Who is Grace Mugabe? How was she impacted Mugabe's personal and political trajectories precisely? And beyond Grace, Mugabe's mistresses, his family, and his first wife, Sally. I think that personal dimension needs to be emphasized a bit more. Now, I want to say something else here that I think that's a bit important to take on board as well. Second criticism concerns the chapter written by Robert Mpofu in the book. Robert Mpofu worked for Mugabe for many years, wrote a chapter in this book, and it discusses Robert Mugabe as a victim, or whether he was a victim of international imperialist forces or Pan-African hero during his political career. There's another chapter in the book by a scholar, Avoid Mama Masiraha, who writes about Mugabe's fall from power. Masiraha argues that Mugabe's fall should be seen as a long decline starting in the late 1990s. Now, while I appreciated Masiraha's attempt to historicize Mugabe's fall in the book, the chapter does rehash literature and debates we already know. There is much about the nature and reasons for Mugabe's fall from power that remains hidden. And Robert Mpofu knows a significant amount from the vantage point of the low-cost faction that he was part of, which is unknown about what really happened in the twilight of Mugabe's political career. Now, I read Mpofu's autobiography, On the Shoulders of Struggle, and came away with a distinct impression that he held back in that book. Mpofu's On the Shoulders of Struggle concealed more than it revealed about what really happened to Mugabe politically in those final stages. I had hoped the editors of this book that we're launching today would have assigned the chapter on Mugabe's fall to Robert Mpofu and pushed him to reflect in critical and intellectually honest ways about the manner and precise dynamics surrounding Mugabe's fall. And I want to put it to the editors of the book that an opportunity was missed here. And also to say that I think Zimbabwe needs honest, candid histories about Mugabe's fall, not the rehashing of well-worn debates, or indeed the self-interested action of making history incomprehensible, vague, or unintelligible. The third criticism I want to raise, which I hope will prove constructive, concerns the sometimes problematic assumption in the book that Mugabe left behind a philosophical legacy. To be fair, Tinashe Chisaira's chapter in the book is ambivalent about Mugabe's ideological leanings, maintaining that Mugabe was at once neither 100% to the left and yet not wholly neoliberal as well. That's what Chisaira has to say. Still, I want to come back to this underlying problematic assumption because Mugabe did not leave behind published work which systematically sets out his original and appropriated political and economic ideas. Kwame Nkrumah wrote Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. Julius Nyerere wrote Freedom and Unity. Davaninghi Stole wrote African Nationalism. Nelson Mandela wrote Long Walk to Freedom. Amilcar Cabral wrote Revolution in Guinea. Mugabe did not himself systematize and publish his political and economic ideas. So I think it is untimely to set out Mugabe's philosophical legacy, as sections of the book attempt to do. The immediate task, in my view, really ought to be about the systematic recovery of Mugabe's self-written private essays, notes, diaries, audio recordings, letters, even his comments in the margin of key party and state policy documents, amongst other primary sources. These primary materials would then be critically analyzed and perhaps become the basis of a synthesized, organized body of ideas that would then inform exacting debates about what Mugabe's philosophical legacy might actually be. That's another thing I hope the editors will take on board as a constructive criticism. The next thing I wanted to bring up is the idea as well that seems to run through sections of the book, that somehow domestic opposition in Zimbabwe and civil society are driven and shaped by Western actors and forces. I think we must assign agency to Zimbabweans. If we do away with agency in this way, basically what this book is projecting is racialized self-hate. The idea that Black Zimbabweans can't envisage the absence of democracy or can't envisage a sense of opposition to an authoritarian nationalism for themselves and have to wait for some external actor or donor in the US or the UK to motivate and fund them. I think that's the self-hate underlying that. I think we must give agency to local opposition, local civil society, even if the behaviors of Western states have sometimes compromised the standing of civil society and domestic opposition parties within Zimbabwe. itself. So the last thing I'll say, I could say some other things. This will kind of be I'll throw this out, will be a question to the editors who are present here, Mahomba in particular. Idi Amin's name comes up a lot in Western media whenever contemporary African dictators are discussed. In the West, Idi Amin exemplifies both a personal notion of evil and a political notion of evil seen as unconstrained dictatorship. Mugabe and Amin are two very different political operators, were two different political operators, I should say, yet they're regarded in strikingly similar ways. In that sense, this notion of evil, whether it's by the political notion or the personal. And I wonder if the editors could care to reflect on that as well, because there's a sense in the book when Mugabe's the depiction is this evil character, political notions, and at that personal level, this somehow seems unique. Yet other African leaders have been depicted in the same way, and Amin is one, and Amin has very little in common with Mugabe, or had very little in common with Mugabe. And I would like to push the editors to think about that as well, the way that actually those kinds of depictions of Mugabe are not that unique. And in taking that on board, trying to relate the ways in which Mugabe has been depicted in relation to leaders such as Idi Amin. I can say more, but I think I should stop there in the interest of time. Thank you very much for listening, and congratulations again on the book.
Thanks, Miles. There's a powerful review there. Mahomba, is it about you want to react now or you want to react later? I'm going to request Miles to put what he has just said on paper. That's a review that we will publish. But thanks, Miles, for a very powerful review of the book. I'm going to bring in Fei Chung, and Fei Chung is my guest at home. So we're sharing the screen here. I'm going to give her the screen now. Fei Chung has agreed to join us. She's no stranger to Zimbabwean politics and Zimbabwean academia. Author of a book, one of the first on the struggle. Become a very important book, a very important statement. But more recently, Faye has rejoined ZANU PF. So we'd like to find out from her whether that's consistent with the writings that we see here in the form of this book, and given the commentaries that we said are going to be made in the course of this discussion about the ZANU PF in the Mugabe era, in the post-coup era, and in the future. Maybe she can also reflect on that as she presents her observations on the book. Faye, into my chair.
Thank you very much, Ibo. When I read this book with its many chapters, I thought the chapters were uneven. Some of them were excellent, and definitely I highly recommend that everybody reads this book because it has such a lot of valuable information about Mugabe and about the situation he was in. But on the whole, I felt two very important things were missing. One is the situation that he was in before independence, during the first years of independence, and then as he aged. I think there are definite changes in his character. I think knowing him in his late 40s and in his 50s, the prime of his life, he was a very consultative, highly intelligent person who did not impose his will on everybody like a dictator. He was not a dictator. He was a very consultative person in finding the opinions of everybody and considering them very seriously. But then I also know him when he's in his 70s and 80s and eventually in his 90s. And I think his character did change, that he became more rigid in terms of sticking to his views. Although they were the views he had when he was in his 50s, he kept to his views, but he was much less flexible as he grew older, which perhaps is what happens to all of us. When we get to 70, we become less flexible. I'm actually 80, so I know what I'm talking about. The other thing I felt we did not know about from the book is the constituencies, the kind of institutions that were around him and which he had to cope with. Let's say cabinet, let's say parliament, let's say Ministry of Education, or Ministry of Economic Affairs and Finance, the media, the independent media, the state media, the fact that we are in a sycophantic tradition, because I think Zimbabwean tradition, maybe it reflects something in Africa, is always to praise whoever is in power. Now that can become a problematic kind of situation where every day of your life you are praised. And I think this happens to everybody who is in power in a country like Zimbabwe. And I think it means it may affect you, because the change from a highly flexible, highly creative mind to a very rigid mind, I think does reflect what happens when people keep repeating what they think you want to hear. That's very common in Zimbabwe. People listen to you very carefully and they try and work out what you really think and what you really want to hear, and they come out with it. And this is, I think, very worrying for anybody in power, that those who are your subordinates are going to repeat your ideas slavishly, so to speak. And I think this happened a lot to Mugabe, especially in cabinet, because he was able to appoint cabinet ministers on his own without asking for advice from anybody. And he didn't ask for advice from anybody in terms of personalities. He judged them by himself. And when you are a cabinet minister and you know your position is wholly dependent on Mugabe, I think it may be natural that you don't contradict him all the time. I don't think he liked being contradicted, but in the earlier days, he really listened to everybody. This is what I'm trying to say. And I think this doesn't come out, the time difference in the Mugabe we knew. I think the situation that was happening in Zimbabwe, the fact that we got independence when whites were 3.6 to 4% of the population, but owned 3/4 of the economy and controlled half of the land, and that's the better half with the best rainfall. And Africans owned very little. We agreed with a constitution which said, willing seller, willing buyer. The fact is, no African would have been able to buy one farm, not to say thousands of farms. So the whole fundamental basis of the original constitution was problematic. And I think in negotiating it, they could have got something a little bit better than what we got, which was willing seller, willing buyer. And the human rights that were emphasized were all about property. Property rights were defended other rights, like let's say millions of Zimbabweans have no jobs, the right to a job, that is not even mentioned. The right to education and health, very slightly. So I think you start off with a constitution which from the beginning was very problematic, and there was a lot of pressure on Mugabe from the frontline states, Zambia and Mozambique, to accept the constitution as holy as it was. So you have to look at the situation that Mugabe was in, where he knew that by accepting willing seller, willing buyer, he would be betraying the land resettlement challenge of Zimbabwe. And he did accept it. Nevertheless, in the first decade and a half of independence, we had an excellent land resettlement program, partly funded by Britain's Thatcher government and partly by the Zimbabwe government, where something like 75,000 settlers were actually resettled in a very orderly manner. But now you do see some problem. Why is it that that land resettlement, which was so excellent in every way, only lasted for about 10 years? Why could that resettlement not have lasted for 40 years that Mugabe was more or less in power? And certainly it means that after 10 years, he must have changed his mind. And this is apparent in his banning any increase of the first land resettlement program. And I think the change was he became convinced that the peasant was not going to get anywhere, and that what Zimbabwe needed was the high-tech, highly financed farmers, the white farmers. So we find by the mid and late 1990s, the land resettlement is praising the white farmers. It was the white farmers' decade next after the peasant farmers' decade in the first place. Now, I think that is a big change in policy, that you have both the resettlement of 75,000 low-income Zimbabwe, and then you start saying the high-income farmers are probably the future. Ibo and Miles were talking about the future of Zimbabwe, and this is an important question. Surely, most of the countries in the world, whether it's United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, China, have both small-scale farmers and medium and large-scale farmers. They are complementary. And I think Zimbabwe should have realized that we need the small-scale farmers. We should not have concentrated on them only for a decade. We should have concentrated on them all the time. At the same time, the giving of thousands of hectares to political politicians and military leaders, I think it was done without financial plan, without a technical and professional plan, without community consultation. And I think this is something that happened in the first decade and a half. There was a lot of community participation. We could not have done as well as we did in the 1980s and the first half of the 1990s without a lot full-scale community support. But this disappeared. So what was it in the institution of Zimbabwe politics that the importance of the community participation in development could disappear so quickly? did he have his own picture of an ideology? Because we are really coming to understand that ideology is very important. For the first decade, we were supposed to be Marxist, Leninist, socialists. And I often ask, what did we mean by Marxist? What did we mean by Leninist? And what did we mean by socialism? I think with socialism, we had a fairly clear understanding in that we did universal primary education, free primary education. Everybody thought that was socialist and accepted it. We started health facilities, clinics and hospitals in the rural areas, which were never there except for mission stations. And we started having clean water supply for drinking in the cities and in the rural areas. Now we all realize that those three things were socialist. Whether they were Marxist, Leninist, another question. But how come after about 16 or 20 years, those three things were weakened? We had 100% primary education for all. Now we have 96%. Now we must say 96% is better than before independence when it was 35%. But the 4% not in school come to 250,000 children. That's quite a lot. How come 70,000 children cannot write grade 7 exams? Before, they didn't have to pay for writing grade 7. Now they have to pay. Why? We decided we don't want exams to be marked by computer only. They have to be marked by hand. Once we get teachers to mark, they charge you about $2 per script, and the candidate has to pay for it. And some people are so poor that they can't write the exams. So these things happened in Zimbabwe, and it means the original three socialist ideas were undermined. I think Mugabe's ideology, he didn't write it down. And I think it's a great pity he didn't, because I think he had some clear ideas. The clear ideas I always got was he linked socialism to his childhood as a student in a Catholic mission school and training college, where they got everything free, free food, free housing, free education. I think he had that clearly as an idea of socialism. And I can remember an item in the cabinet where both myself and Minister Mutumbuka said we want to have free education up to the 9th grade of education, Form 2. And Mugabe said, no, we have to have it for O levels, A levels, and university. Now, I said, we've done the maths and we can't afford A levels, O levels, and university, but we can afford up to Form 2. You know, the cabinet, except for 3 of us, rejected it because they saw Mugabe was critical of us not giving free education to everybody for all of education. Now, that's in the school that he came from. I think I must stop there. Just to repeat, my main items are, what were the institutional background? What were the situations that Mugabe had to face, whether internally or externally, and how did they affect him, and how did age affect him? Thank you.
Thanks, Faye, for giving us changing chairs. We're in the same location with Faye, and happily so. We'll come back to Faye on ZANU PF, because we want to reflect on that. And I hope you'll be able to come back shortly on that subject. But now I'll turn to Chipo Dendere, one of our academics in the diaspora in the US. She has been on this policy dialogue a number of times before. So Chipo, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So first of all, a big congratulations to the author of this, to the authors of this book. I've been thinking a lot that writing, I mean, critiquing is easy. When you read this book, there's a lot that jumped out to me, and I started writing down all the things that I didn't like. But I took a step back and I realized that we don't have enough that's been written by Zimbabweans about Zimbabwe. So regardless of where we stand and how we evaluate this from an academic or a social perspective, I think this is good. This idea of delving into a single subject and figuring out what we can learn about that person. So I wanted to start there and say, congratulations. It's a lot to put things together, to work on a chapter with multiple people. So thank you for this work. I devoted most of my time, the first chapter that drew my interest had to do with Robert Mugabe and his language skills. The chapter devoted to his English, I believe it starts off telling us that he has been regarded as Africa's most well-spoken individual. And that chapter took us through the educational policy which has shaped Zimbabwe since the 1980s. What struck me is that we have not had, or Robert Mugabe himself, I think Miles spoke on this, that whilst he didn't, do a good job of writing his own thoughts, I also think that there was no articulation of what educational policies were meant to do for the Zimbabwean child. So I went through and I read the various education acts that we've had since the 1980s. And so in this chapter, the argument is that he kept English as the primary language for ease of learning, which is quite contradictory, right, to his persona of being anti everything to do with colonialism. And yet he himself felt very strongly to hold on to English. Now, I'm not saying that there was anything wrong with English, but I get a sense of an individual who was very conflicted in how he presented himself and also how he governed. One would have thought that Robert Mugabe might have introduced Swahili or other African languages to Zimbabwe, but that doesn't seem to be the path that he was taking. What's also highlighted in this chapter, and I was thinking about this, whether or not what Robert Mugabe would have said to the fact that keeping English as a primary language was a big contributor to brain drain. How he would have evaluated that this policy on education and language facilitated the outward migration of millions of Zimbabweans, whether he would have struggled with his role in that. But I suppose that is the good thing, right? That at a time when Zimbabweans needed an outlet, when they needed to be able to leave the country, they had this education, they had the language that facilitated their ability to do so. I also spent a lot of time engaging with the chapter on land reform. Again, going back to the language, it said there that the Lancaster Agreement was made possible in part because of Robert Mugabe's fluency in English. And in thinking about this, I also thought, well, this book puts a lot of praise on Robert Mugabe's proximity to whiteness, to English, his proximity to the British culture. And there is no problem with that. And yet, when it comes to proximity of opposition candidates to the same Westerners, then we get into a place where they become puppets. but the same is not true when we're thinking about Robert Mugabe. Even now, just to bring it to the present, where the current president is very excited about his trip to England, and we've heard so much about it from his spokesperson and others, that the proximity to whiteness and the proximity to England, in particular, the colonial master, is okay as long as it is done by those within the ranks of ZANU PF. And yet, when it comes to anybody outside of those ranks, as presented in this book, then it becomes neo-colonial. I actually don't think that Robert Mugabe was about the decolonization agenda. I think the book could have benefited from an entire chapter about his wardrobe. I don't know if this is true, but I grew up being told that Robert Mugabe had a body double in London for purposes of making sure that his suits were well suited to him. So I don't think he was as committed to the project of decolonization as the book seems to portray. I think, and so for me, this was the challenge with the book. As much, and again, I want to emphasize that I really appreciate having the book, but I thought that the authors were projecting onto Robert Mugabe how they would have liked him to be seen, but we don't get a deep analysis of it.
Then after 2 weeks, we buy another bunch.
We don't get a deep analysis of him as an individual, because if we did that, then everything from his obsession with, British fashion to the language to the education policies would have shown that we had somebody who was quite comfortable with a lot of, the British remnants in Zimbabwean culture until we get to land reform. And even then, at least drawing from the book, it seems that that was not a policy that was central in the Lancaster House Agreement for Robert Mugabe, that when they entered the Lancaster House Agreement, I don't think he had land reform at the top of his mind. That what we later on see in the 2000s is more of a knee-jerk reaction to the politics of the day, but it was not his philosophy or his ideology. It wasn't driven by his philosophy or his ideology. I'm just going through my notes here.
And people, don't forget to comment on the nature of ZANU PF, the current dynamic. Yes,
I'm not done. Sorry. Sorry, because I went through every chapter of the book. I wanted to spend some time talking on what I think is I think one of the most fascinating chapters, which is on music, the role of music. Again, here I thought, oh my God, why don't we dig in? I wanted to see rallies. I wanted to see a breakdown of which musicians he supported. I thought it was particularly fascinating that Robert Mugabe wanted a British artist at independence and not Bob Marley. That was mind-blowing to me. But again, it goes back to what I was saying, right? That Robert Mugabe was not nearly as anti-colonial agenda as people think. Like, he is a guy who wanted us to have a white British guy singing at independence and not Bob Marley. But the importance of music, when we contrast it with the post-Robert Mugabe era, what I found with Robert Mugabe and his use of music is that I think there was actually a bit of thinking behind it, right? So we talk a lot, at least on the social media spheres, on Jonathan Moyo's role in shaping music and the arts. And I do think there was some intelligent thinking there. It was draconian, but I think there was some intelligent thinking there. Whereas in the post-Mugabe era, what I'm sensing is that this is very knee-jerk. Even the music, it does not make as much sense, right? This new revolutionary music under Emmerson Mnangagwa. I think actually in the chapter we say that ZANU PF isn't as interested in music as it was under Robert Mugabe. I don't think that's quite true. I think they just haven't landed on how to use music well. And that's something that under Robert Mugabe, they managed to do well, right? Which is the supporting of local artists. And at the same time, we don't know if Robert Mugabe supported this himself, which is what I think Miles alluded to, that we don't have the personal here. I am surprised that nobody interviewed his children or Grace Mugabe, because I think we could have benefited from that. Did he like the music? Did he like the jingles? Did he enjoy the way that people would dance and sing for him? And there's no chapter on the clothing, right? The clothing with his face on it, which we've seen the new ZANU PF is doing that, but was that engineered by Robert Mugabe himself? Was that him wanting to see his face on people's bodies? Or, you know, was that just reactionary to something else? So I think we could have benefited from the personal. But again, you know, as good academics, what you've done is you've given us something to jump off of. And I want, and I hope that Faye can speak a little bit to the educational policies at the time, to push a little bit on the use of, not just the use of English, but the design of our curriculum. I would like to hear more about that. And then in terms of what happens now, I think the book gives this impression that ZANU PF has dwindled to some extent in the post-Mugabe era, but I don't think so. I think what we're seeing is an evolution, which is just as important, right? This is why it's so important for us to have a change in politics all the time. So now we're seeing how Emmerson Mnangagwa governs. I think Emmerson Mnangagwa, unlike Robert Mugabe, is very interested in documentation. So we've seen the Eddie Cross book. I think it's the third Emmerson Mnangagwa book that we've had since Emmerson came into power. And I haven't read any of them yet. I just haven't had the time. I've had a little child. But this is the third book on Emmerson Mnangagwa. So he's very interested in documenting. And that might actually be good for Zimbabwean democracy, because as he sees himself written on paper, maybe that will influence some of the policy choices that he makes. I don't know. But I do think it makes a difference if people are interested in documenting their experiences as leaders, but also their policies. But I'll pause there because, you know, I think we still have 3 other people.
Not really. Okay, we'll leave you. We'll come back to you. We haven't answered the question we raised earlier on, the future of ZANU PF.
Oh, wait, Professor, I guess I missed the question on the future of ZANU PF. Well, I think ZANU PF is renewing itself, right? I think it's frightening, but I spend a lot of time just studying social media and social movement patterns. And I think one of the things that fascinate me about ZANU PF is their ability to convince young voters more than older voters. And I think this is going to be the big thing for the next election, right? That how ZANU PF has managed to convince younger voters to support them. So a lot of times we talk about ZANU PF as having most of its support in the rural, in the elderly. But I think their strategy going forward is to attract the younger voter, the 22 to 35-year-old. And I think that's where they're putting their money. I think that's where the future of ZANU PF is headed. And you can think about why they would do that, right? This is a generation that has grown up with the opposition as it is. This is a generation where it is easier to convince them that the future under ZANU PF could be better because they're younger. It's much more difficult to do that with people that are now in their 40s. But it's quite easy for ZANU PF to convince 25-year-olds that supporting the ruling party is better for their future. We can see the flamboyance of ZANU PF.
How would you reconcile that statement with the Zambian president, where in fact it was the youth rather than the older voters who turned things around? Or rather the tendency in African politics, not only African politics, but politics everywhere, for younger voters, especially first-time voters,
we make this, so we ask all these questions about how does Zimbabwe compare to Zambia, but we have to look at the historical narrative, right? So Zambia has already gone through their transition. The challenge right now for Zimbabwean politics and with the younger voters and their engagement is that the MDC, it's been on the scene for a long time, and not because of any fault of their own, but the fact that the MDC hasn't successfully won a transitional election, by which I mean we haven't had an MDC president yet. So that plays a major role in how young people evaluate and participate in Zimbabwean politics. Whereas Zambia in 1991 already went through that transition, right? And they've done the back and forth. So I know that for a lot of people coming into politics today, the Zambian election seems revolutionary, but the revolution started in 1990. That's when they kicked out or they voted out their equivalent of ZANU PF. So where we are now, they've had almost 30 years of changing political parties and changing political actors. And Zimbabwe is still yet to go through that. And that's where the challenge for Zimbabwean politics lies, that we haven't had that initial transition. So we haven't had the initial transition. We also find ourselves with an opposition that's slightly weakened, right? Due to internal issues, but also because of funding issues. And ZANU PF, for whatever reason, they have a lot of money right now that they are throwing to young people. And they have managed to use the influencers to their advantage. So when social media and the internet first came to play, we all say that, oh, this is going to be good for democracy. This is going to be good for opposition parties. But what a lot of us didn't realize is that ruling parties were also learning, right? And so ZANU PF has been constantly learning, and they go and find the people where they are. Now, I'm not saying that, because the thing is that you have to be very careful what you say in Zimbabwean spaces, because it gets taken on Twitter and people misunderstand what we're saying. All I'm saying is that ZANU PF has been strategic in finding the voters where they are. And the young people right now, they're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they're following Java, they're following all these celebrities, whether or not you like them, but the fact that these young people that are in our ears 24/7 are also collaborating with ZANU PF is going to make a difference come 2023. But again, it's really, really important to understand that the revolution for Zambia, this election was important, yes, but the seeds for the revolution began in 1990. And unlike Zambia, Zimbabwe has not yet made that first transition. And our opposition has got so many different struggles that they are facing. So the young people vote is not guaranteed for the opposition as it were in 2000. So in 2000, that was a very different political landscape in which a lot of young voters, many of those now in their 40s and 50s, were likely to support the opposition without a doubt. But today the landscape is a bit different. And I think ZANU PF is really using their resources to capture those really young voters, and I would say the 22 to 30 age group.
Okay, Chibo, let's hear Zamchia. Zamchia, your turn. Looking specifically at the politics, current politics, the dynamics in ZANU PF, post-coup, and going forward. Zamchia.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Ibo. I have a PowerPoint presentation here, and let me just say, I appreciate all the viewers, all the participants, and it's always a pleasure to be on this very important platform. So I'm not going to repeat the reviews about the book and so forth, but I'm going to talk about ZANU PF's current political dynamics, the balance of forces, and perhaps possible scenarios going into the future. So I'll try to, yeah. Yeah. So what I'm going to do tonight is to look at the scope and cohesion of the post-coup ZANU PF to understand whether it is still a mass-based organization with thriving cells in the metropolis and in the rural villages that will lead to party survival, or whether ZANU PF is now an empty organizational shell about to explode and disintegrate post Robert Mugabe. I posit that ZANU PF at this interregnum faces serious intra-party divisions from the presidium to the cell, but a cohesive state machinery keeps it breathing. So first, let's look at the presidium. There is a power struggle between Mnangagwa and Chiwenga since the two conspired to overthrow Mugabe in the November 2017 military coup. Mnangagwa has been working to sideline Chiwenga from the critical levers of state and party power, as now revealed in his new authorized biograph that Miles Tend was referring to. For example, Mnangagwa reassigned some of the military elites who were involved in the coup and were closer to Chiwenga from the army to civilian posts to coup-proof. Major General Sanyetwe, who was commander of the Presidential Guard Brigade during the coup, was replaced by Brigadier General Fidelis Mwanda. Air Vice Marshal Shumbaya Wonda, who was the acting commander of the Air Force during the coup, was reassigned. Major General Chedondo and the late Nyikayaramba were reassigned to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In August 2019, the commander of the artillery brigade in Lomboshawa, Brigadier General Stanley Mangena, was actually humiliated as he was moved to command agriculture and replaced by Brigadier General Sidin Singiz, a close ally to Mnangagwa. And just giving examples, if you look in the Presidential Guard, the unit is second in command, Colonel David Nyasha, was replaced by Mnangagwa's former aide de camp, Neva Jones Makuyana. Lieutenant Colonel Mangezi took over from Samson Murombo, who was accused of plotting to kill Mnangagwa by the First Lady Auxilia Mnangagwa. And recently, that is 10 November 2020, Mnangagwa promoted 54 Zimbabwean National Army officers to the position of Lieutenant Colonel. But the issue here is that Chiwenga is no lightweight and is fighting back within the presidium. And what is remarkable is that ZANU PF officially admits that there are internal forces trying to remove Mnangagwa and replace him with Chiwenga. So if you look at Love Momatuke's report to the Politburo on 29 July 2020, he implicated party members who were working with opposition forces to topple Mnangagwa. And actually, this was so serious that former Politburo members Chizema and the late Savanu were expelled from the party on 19 August 2020 for, I quote, serious treachery, close quote. And another youth league member, Tinashe Maduza, was also expelled in early August 2020 for printing the flyers for the demonstrations. And some of the posters that you were caught with were written, "Our generals liberate us from Mnangagwa. So you see this elite discohesion within the presidium. And within that matrix, it is very clear that even the youth chair for Matabeleland North Province, Tamukanyon, was also suspended on the same charge. But I want to say that both men, Mnangagwa and Chiwenga, despite the public appearances, they are now very paranoid and they no longer eat at party functions, never mind even drinking water or enjoying ice cream as they used to do in Amon during Mugabe's time. So these fierce power struggles continue, but both these sides have access to the security sector. And I think any fallout is going to plunge Zimbabwe into a crisis with serious ramifications. From the presidium, let us look at the Politburo and the silent pain. Robert Mpofu, Patrick Chinamasa, Engelbert Rugeje, Christopher Mtangwa, and Paul Mangwana. They are in silent pain. They think that they were very central to the military coup that happened in November 2017 and were supposed to be rewarded with high-ranking cabinet posts. But actually they've been sidelined and are just now at the ZANU PF headquarters. Of course, they do earn as much as the cabinet ministers earn today, but they don't have room for patronage, which comes with controlling ministerial posts. Talk to them and you understand what I'm saying. Then the commissariat of ZANU PF is very important, but today it is a source of instability. ZANU PF has had 3 national commissars in 3 years since 2017. Victor Matemadanda was appointed the acting commissar after the coup, and he served for only 6 days after replacing Xavier Kasikwere before General Rugejo took over. Rugejo took over, but he was replaced with Matemadanda again. What was he accused of? Presiding over shambolic 2018 ZANU PF primary polls, where senior members like Opam Chinguri lost. This was so heated that you heard Mchanga actually telling Rugejo that he was the worst political commissar that the party has ever had. For the record, that was Monday, 23 April 2018. So still looking at the commissariat and the instability there, Mchangwa even followed with an official letter to the party's National Electoral Commission, where he accused Matemadanda of being a political novice who sought advice from a rehabilitated ex-Gamatox commissar in the form of Webster Shamu to turn police into returning officers. So this didn't last long. Rugejo was eventually replaced by Matemadanda, who was also fired, but not before he was poisoned at a party function in Mashonaland East for 1, presiding over chaotic DCC elections in December 2020 that further weakened the party, fanning factionalism in the party, working with Mavuma, Mackenzie, Samambra in order to decimate July Moyo and Owen Move politically. And these guys called themselves Super La Costa. And in ZANU PF internal circles, they were known as Gokwe Boys. And also, Hope Nobbing with Joyce Mujuri's supporters and G40 elements during his graduation ceremony. And I want to say, if you look at the commissariat, You then have Patrick Chinomasa, who was appointed in June 2021 to bring stability. Can he? He has no liberation war credentials. He has no shared history and memory with ZANU PF. He lacks a solid support base in the party. Actually, he lost the 2018 parliamentary elections in his home area, Makon Central constituents, to David Tekesha. And as we speak, youth, ZANU PF youth, are actually demanding his farm in Headlands, which is called Sukumai, to be downsized. It's about 3,000 hectares. Now let's move to the provincial levels. Let's look at Harare and Bulawayo provinces. I think I've only looked at 5 provinces so far, as Dr. Ibomand has said that this is a study in progress. So let's look at Harare and Bulawayo. ZANU PF has been operating without provincial executives since 2019, when they were dissolved. Since 2019, when they were dissolved for performing dismally in the 2018 general elections. What you have are interim provincial chairpersons who were selected in August 2020. I say selected because the Politburo recommended the 30-member DCCs to elect members from among themselves. So you have a party that has interim provincial, chairpersons in 2 metropolitan provinces of Zimbabwe. Let's look at Mashonaland West. It's still deeply divided. You have Abia Mujere versus Mary Muliswa versus Dexter Nduna. And I want to quote here the Politburo member Ziambi. We have become the West Province, with ZANU PF members taking their fights to social media. I was shocked when I was elevated to the Politburo. I thought it was going to be an occasion of celebrating, but it became an occasion for fighting for the chairmanship. Insults were exchanged on social media, and up to this day, members are still attacking one another, close quote. And also in a letter to ZANU PF chairperson Opam Chinguri, dated May 10, 2021, Paradza made a plea. I read from his letter, where he was saying that Mike Chimombe is now behaving like a warlord in Makonde, in particular Chinoi constituents, where he has divided the party by sponsoring a gang of hooligans whose actions and behavior are working against the party and our leader. He actually then says that if no action is taken against Mike Chimombe now, as your DCC chairman, I'll be forced to abandon Chinoi and concentrate on Mangura and Makonde constituencies only. You would have to administer Chinoi from head office because it is no longer governable. Because it is no longer governable, I repeat. This lawlessness within the party must be stopped now. You go to Mashonaland Central, it's Kazembe versus James Makamba versus Lazarus Dokora versus Sem Parenyatwa versus Monica Mavunga. I sum up with a quote from an insider. The situation in Mashonaland Central is now very tense. We move from Mashonaland Central to Manicaland. The ZANU PF provincial chairperson, Mike Madiro, who came into power in November 2017, is actually facing an internal revolt after failing to unite the party. Talk to Gift Kagweda, the war veteran and provincial party commissar, he doubles up. He had this to say, I quote, Comrade Mike Madiro is failing to unite the party in the province, and there's confusion in some branches, and these are things we are looking at. I'm saying it's time for Comrade Madiro to rest. And so far, we are weighing two candidates, Albert Nyakuyedzwa and Enoch Porusingazi. It is all out war in Chipinge, Nyanga, and Mutare districts. Chinamasa has admitted, I quote, recently we were in Nyanga and we met leaders there over factionalism, and the meeting ended at 1 a.m. as we tried to get things right. We were in Mutare to deal with the divisions. We were supposed to be in Chipinge this weekend, but there were other pressing issues. Let's go to the district coordinating committees. Factional fights have played out since their return. On 26 March 2021, a ZANU PF circular from the headquarters actually reprimanded the DCC chairpersons from taking unconstitutional, unprocedural, and divisive actions and decisions. But these DCCs have largely been defiant, prompting another 3 August Circular 6 of 2021, which pronounced all co-options made from April to December 2021. I don't know why it was ahead of time, but I'm in possession of this circular, declaring them null and void. Rugare Gumbo, readmitted in ZANU PF, has actually called for the disbandment of the DCCs, which fuels growing factional and tribal war. But let me say and emphasize that the DCCs in ZANU PF are not even trusted. Hence, blending of their training at Chitepo School of Ideology with chiefs and civil servants. For the sake of time, I will not read this letter, but it's from the Chitepo School of Ideology, emphasizing that the DCCs must be trained together with the civil servants and chiefs so that they can be able to attain ZANU PF's 5 million voter population in the year 2023. The Youth League is unstable too. There was a heated and divided Politburo meeting. That was number 336 Politburo meeting, where some of you might know that the Youth League Secretary, Pupurai Togarepi then, who had sided with Mnangagwa in ZANU PF factional fights pre-coup, pre-disposition of Mugabe, was deposed from the Politburo. He had to pack and leave immediately. He was embarrassed at that meeting. Louis Matutu, his deputy, was suspended for 1 year. Godfrey Tsenenkamu, the political commissar, was also suspended for 1 year, but later expelled because they had named and shaped alleged corrupt individuals. Because there's no energy in the league, according to senior ZANU PF officials. That's why you see people like Kudzai Chipanga have been readmitted to try and revitalize the base ahead of 2023. And one story that we forget is that even Chirau, now heading the youth, is there in the acting capacity. In the acting capacity, maybe 24 months before the next election. And then finally, let's look at the cell. Tafadzwa Mugadi of ZANU PF, he made a very bold claim in the Sunday Mail on 22 August that the party is currently standing above 3 million members. He said he was using the party cell register. If you look even at the African National Congress in South Africa, which is one of the oldest national liberation movements in the world. Yes. It has 1.4 million registered numbers, up from 900.
I'm coming, give me 1 moment.
in December 2017. It begs the question, why so high for ZANU PF? Obviously, there's use of coercion in some instances to get people registered. I quote here from the teachers' movement. Over the weekend, members of ZANU PF terrorized some teachers at Kagande in Mutoko district, forcing them to register as part of the 5 million voters for ZANU PF. In some cases, ZANU PF had all the details of the teachers. They just visited to confirm, close quote. Surveillance is pervasive at the cell level. People believe they are being seen. The party cell register is an instrument of institutionalized patronage that is linked to local food and farming inputs distribution. It is therefore difficult to know who is ZANU PF at heart and who is not, even if we are to believe the bold claim by Mugabe that they have 3 million. For the sake of time, I'll just summarize other sources of discohesion. There's fear of the resurgence in ZANU PF, real fear of the resurgence of the G40 and Gamatox factions poised to fight for the soul of ZANU PF from within, number one. Number two, the ethnocentric approach to politics, where the Karangas are being given preference. Number three, unresolved Bulawayo bombing incident. If you look at the recent biography of Mnangagwa, they are saying the bomb was of Chinese origin and there was military precision. And they never mentioned that Chiwenga was also, he also escaped that danger and his wife was harmed. Number three, differences, the West or just the East in diplomatic engagement. Remind me where Chiwenga is so proactively talking about the West, is always talking about the East. ED, you can pick incidences where he's talking about the West. Number five, war veterans discontent. They have been arrested recently, but they have also penned a letter of discontent. And number six is about the purging of the security element within the party, either by natural means, SB Moyo, Ikayaramba, Shiri, Zimond, etc. Those who are dying by natural means, and I emphasize by natural means, they are from the security element, but also by design. There's purging by design, as in Mnangagwa's biography, in order to coup-proof, avoid the next coup. And the conclusion, even though I've focused on the part ZANU PF has actually evolved to such an extent that it must be considered part of the state resource allocation process. Hence, there's a party state. So if Zimbabwe transits to a normal democratic polity with competitive opposition forces, then the state of ZANU PF I have described points to a possible implosion or a loss in the 2023 general elections. But if Zimbabwe maintains the authoritarian status quo and uncompetitive opposition forces, then a party state election machinery will deliver victory to ZANU PF in 2023. But, a big but, this kind of 2023 election victory is unlikely to resolve the tensions within ZANU PF. Just the same way Mugabe's overwhelming victory in 2013 did not make the party stable internally. After all also note that the battle to succeed Mnangagwa will intensify post-2023, whether ZANU PF wins or loses. And as we know from many parts of the world, succession politics exacerbates elite discohesion and threatens party durability. Thank you, Chairperson Dr. Ibamandas.
Thank you, Tezar. Thank you very much. Well, in the way of getting the discussion going, we still have some minutes. I would want to get, in the first instance, our panelists to respond. I'll begin with Chipo. What's your response to Zamchia's outline? And would you agree?
Yeah, I think, yeah, thank you, Professor Zamchia. That was an excellent analysis. I think one of the conversations missing right now is the role of the military in strengthening ZANU PF. So without the military support, the chaos that is the current ZANU PF party would be more evident, more public. But because they have military support, they have state resources, I think it masks a lot of what Professor Zamchia has so eloquently unpacked for us, the factional issues. I didn't even realize some of those issues, especially in the youth league, in the provincial levels. So yeah, so I think, I don't know that there's much to add because he's done such a good job of unpacking the challenges that ZANU PF is facing internally. But I did want to emphasize that the strength that ZANU PF shows on the outside is because of the military support that they have and the access to state resources that the opposition does not have.
But you still hold your view that the mobilization of the youth on the part of ZANU PF will turn the tide in favor of ZANU PF?
It could. You know, I think the opposition has work to do. I think there is not all of the youth, right? So I think we have to be very mindful about which age group we're talking about. I think ZANU PF is doing a lot of work to register new voters. And we know from studies in other places that the party that registers people tends to get those people to vote for them. So if someone helps someone register today, that person is likely to vote for the person associated with that party. So if it is true that ZANU PF has deployed a lot of their youth to engage, I think the goal is 10,000 voters by December for each district. That's a lot of new voters. And if they get their hands on all of those new voters, that support will more likely go to ZANU PF, just going by the numbers and going by what traditionally happens. If the opposition parties are able to register new voters, to register young voters, and this is what actually happened in Zambia, right? Where Hichilema's party was able to register people and to get them to the polls. So those are the two critical things that made a difference for the youth in Zambia. You register them and you get them to the polls. Can the opposition amass the resources needed to do that? I think that should be the project that they're working on night and day until 2023. Because right now it does seem like ZANU PF is eagerly registering people to vote.
Faye,
on the other hand, well, I'm just gonna say, on the other hand, MDC could do it where ZANU PF uses all their resources to register people to vote, and then they write in and encourage them.
Including coercion.
Yep.
That's a point that Zamchia has made, that hitherto it's mainly through coercion that people are being registered.
Yep.
And he made a distinction between commitment, genuine commitment, and commitment which could be turned around to be actually opposition, as we've seen in previous elections.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask Faye. Faye has been long on the ground. Or your observations on Zamchia's wonderful outline and analysis.
Well, that was a very valuable outline. Having been in ZANU before it was ZANU PF. So it's almost 50 years since I joined ZANU when I was a young lecturer at the University of Zambia. When I joined, because you asked me why did I rejoin ZANU, the reasons I joined in 1983 are very similar to the reasons I'm rejoining. That is, in 1973, most of the freedom fighters were people with 3 or 4 years of primary education. The university people were not heavily involved. And I felt as an individual, we as university personnel should be heavily involved. And I feel this all the more now that we have an intellectual vacuum within ZANU, I think, on almost any topic, whether it's education or economics or community development. I think some of the ideas we have are the ideas we had more than 40 years ago. And I think they are out of date. We engineered an education system in 1980s and it's lasted for 40 years. It is thoroughly out of date, but nobody has come up with a viable alternative. So I think there is need for an intellectual revamping of ZANU PF if it is to survive. I think the other thing I should say is that the role of the military is going to be pivotal. Exactly how the military will react in the next election and in the future of ZANU is, I think, very, very important to analyze, because you have to remember that the people who have come out as leaders now are the over 60s, the over 70s, but the people who were the freedom fighters in the 1970s, the guys who were then 18 or 21, they are still around. They are not even 60 years old. We have to watch out for those who are more intelligentsia than the ones we have had so far.
Yeah, thanks, Faye. Tendi, Miles, your reactions to the presentation by Zamchia? Miles?
No, I have no comments to make with regards to his presentation. He's done his research. I have not done my research in this area. I think I will reserve my judgment for now, except to say that it would be good to see a similar analysis of internal party politics that focuses on the MDC. And then place that side by side with the dynamics is presented with ZANU. And we can better get a sense of actually which party is in better shape to actually win this election. So in the absence of any knowledge of what's also really going on in the MDC, it's hard to make a judgment. According to Zamchia's presentation, things do not look well in ZANU, but we're not also certain about just how well things are in the MDC. So for that reason, I think I'll reserve judgment.
Okay.
I think I could add something that MDC at its beginning in the 1990s had a strong university presence and intellectual, which we don't seem to have anymore.
Okay, then let's have our authors and editors, Mahomva and Sabao. Your comments?
Thank you, Dr. Mandazi.
On some cheers, and also maybe, if you wish, some brief comments on the reviews that were done by the 2 or 3, including Faye. Faye also touched on the book.
Okay, no, thank you,
but
good
begin with some cheers observations.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Doc, for that. Interesting reflections from Dr. Zamchia. But even in writing, when we read writings, we go back to the social pressure points of the writer. And in this case, the views submitted by my good brother Zamchia must also be subjected to interrogating the motives of his submission, which are obviously political. It is common cause that he has got a strong affinity to the opposition, and his total and outright dismissal of ZANU PF is based on that perspective. The starting point really relates to his views about ZANU PF as an empty shell organization, and to deploy a comparative lens within the Zimbabwean political landscape. If we were to look at that level of analysis, ZANU PF and MDC, in my view, I think the MDC alliance in particular is more of an empty shell organization in the sense that it's factionally dismembered, and as it stands, they do not even have an office where they function from. So it's actually a heavily decimated organization, not to mention the perennial factional issues that have characterized the MDC, which would of course be inherent in the outcome of the 2023 election. He speaks of internal divisions in ZANU PF. Look, all political parties are governed by the principle of competition for power. So it is normal that in any political party, there are internal divisions, there are strifes. Actually, those contradictions rejuvenate the political space. You would recall that this is not new in ZANU PF. It dates back to 1963, but the ZANU PF survived, then ZANU survived its way to the 1980 election. Between 2004 to 2008, there was intense Juru factionalism at the time. But ZANU PF survived that in the 2008 election, in the 2013 election. And even the 2018 election was a product of a serious tension in ZANU PF, which culminated in the fall of Robert Mugabe. So it is not new that there are these internal contradictions, if ever they are there. And then he also spoke about the reassignment of generals, and arguing that it is a Mnangagwa strategy to push away the military from the succession matrix. But look, if you go to Robert Mugabe's speech in 1976, he says that the gun will go with our votes. And in articulating that, he was merely referring to the intravenous relationship of the gun and politics. And ZANU PF is a liberation institution that was born out of the barrel of the gun, is going to be sustained by that intravenous relationship of the gun and politics. But also you'd recall that the same Robert Mugabe who says that the gun and our votes will go together, at some point he was saying politics must lead the gun and not the gun leading politics, but it is the gun that found itself leading him out of the political space in 2017. So that's another philosophical contradiction, which I think needs to be intensely, digested. And then you also spoke about the tension between the vice president and the president, and also throwing a dramatic effect to the view that they don't even drink water in the same room, they don't even get to eat meals in state functions. Look, I've personally had the privilege to be in the same room with the president and with the vice president. I've seen them drinking water, I've seen them eating. So I think that is just nothing but, a rumor-anchored perspective, which is not based on the practical reality of the internal dynamics in ZANU PF. And then also he spoke of the restructuring of the commissariat and arguing that it substantiates the instability within ZANU PF. Look, even in private organizations, restructuring of departments and human capital is something that happens across the board. And that in most instances only takes cost to harness the multiplicity of innovations within any institution. And if ZANU PF does that, it can't be treated as something that is unique, which will only culminate in the demise of ZANU PF. And again, he made references to Politburo minutes, Politburo content. And as far as I know, this is largely classified information. And classified as it were, I'm assuming probably you might be using sources from within to use some of these issues as facts. But look, these are sources whose content in most instances may not be verified, and sometimes may only be sources that give information that tends to feed into the anticipated interests of whosoever is being fed with that information. And sometimes there may be lack of truth in that respect. So let's have more authentic documents substantiating the crisis in ZANU PF, other than hearsay, other than using proxies who might even be lying of their constant activity to processes such as the Politburo. And then nonetheless, in conclusion,
and you can wrap up.
And in conclusion, maybe let me thank Dr. Professor Tendi for bringing interesting nuggets, which of course inspired the need to produce a second volume. And also thanks to Professor Chipodendere. So thanks for that. And thanks to you, Good Dog, for the opportunity as well.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to say something? We have maybe 10 minutes. I see many public intellectuals in the room. Alex Magaisa, Silika. Anybody wants to come in? Nobody.
No, my brother. Ngomaibo, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you. Who's that?
Alex.
That's Alex. Yes,
Yes.
you're welcome. Want to hear you. Yes.
No, I thought this was a fantastic event. Really beautiful to hear. I really enjoyed Mao's presentation. I also enjoyed Chipo's presentation, and of course, our elder stateswoman, Fei Chung's presentation. My young brother Pilani, I think he also gave a good presentation. I just wanted to point, sorry, which was made by Miles after Pilani's presentation, that it would have been good to get a good analysis of the MDC. I think that's a strong point, because I think we had a very eloquent and powerful presentation from Pilani about ZANU PF's internal dynamics. I think it would be good also to have an incisive and nuanced presentation of the MDC's internal dynamics. But I don't think that it was the occasion for that. The occasion was the launch of the book. And perhaps, that was not the time to engage in that. But I really enjoyed it. I wasn't going to say anything, but just to congratulate the authors of the book. We don't write our own stories enough. And I think that I want to congratulate people, those who are here. We've got eloquent authors who have written about Zim and our politics. And I think that's what we should do. It's wonderful, it's beautiful to do that. We can disagree on the issues that people raise, but that's natural. That's what we see in the UK, in the US, in Australia, or in other countries. We write our own stories and we challenge them. But, I thought that everybody did fantastically well. It's not for me here. I don't have the time or the occasion to go into much detail, but to congratulate everybody who made such eloquent presentations. I mean, like I said, I enjoyed Mao's critique, which was very constructive. I enjoyed Chipo's presentation, which was also very constructive and very nuanced. I enjoyed Pilani's presentation on ZANU PF. It would have been nice to have had a presentation which also would have done a critique of the MDC. That would have been beautiful. But I also enjoyed Fei Chun's presentation, taking us back to the Liberation War days in the early 80s, and then, of course, the changes that took place in the 80s and 90s. But thank you so much. I hope that we'll have another occasion to do this. Mkoma Ibo, I want also to encourage you. Zoom is a great platform, but we have a new platform that is, engaging people who normally would not come to Zoom, and it's Twitter Spaces. I wish that one day you would, present yourself and use that platform to engage people who normally would not be able to come to Zoom, but would be, very grateful to listen to the beautiful presentation that we have had from the academics today. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Alex. We hold you on to that. Teach us how to organize Twitter. Some of us are still in the 20th century, but we also want to take up the challenge from Miles to look at the opposition as well. We had a session on the opposition some months ago, but I think as we draw towards the elections, it will be timely to begin looking at the full spectrum of Zimbabwean politics. So we'll look at that again. I feel that maybe Professor Zamchia should have the last word. Is someone else want to come in? Karu? Yes, come in.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it is very true. And thankfully, I want to greet all of you in all your esteemed positions. Of course, we've heard quite a lot about that. And I think it is true that we write from a certain position, and quite frankly, when we encounter scholarship, that is, those are the kind of things that we face and that we hear. And I think beyond any critique that we could get, the idea that we are having this platform in its totality to discuss is something that is uniquely new. And I think this contestation of ideas is what drives scholarship ahead. So peculiar to that instance, I think I would have loved to hear a perspective of how Zimbabwe is setting a precedence to the rest of the African nations. Not only are we the only case which has had quite a few dispositions when it comes to developments in land reform, but also in the change of the political orders and also how we are structured in a political order. I think Zimbabwe is a set pacer in its own sense, and this is something that we can easily divorce from our inclinations, for example, to analyze within the routines of political parties or to extend within those confinements. But more so, I think what the speakers have been speaking about moderately or much more intensively so brings about the very important question of when are we to expect the second edition, and if so, can we get at least copies of it beforehand so that we also have privy to read it and much more substantially contribute to the discussions beforehand, because to an extent as an audience, I felt every other presenter had the privilege to actually go into detail with the book, and we were not so sure of the modalities of how we could get it so far. And secondly, and lastly, more importantly, I think there is an important thing that we're learning also as junior scholars, that we need to pass on the baton stick to younger scholars in that sense. And in this sense, I want to thank everyone who was quite senior and leveraging therefore the discussion between people who are in the high echelons of academia. So next time when we host such platforms, I would expect also to see upcoming scholars also putting on their perspectives, not that they have to have doctorates, but because of systemic and strategic difficulties, they might not necessarily be there yet, but their perspectives matter anyway. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. Send us your CV. We'd like you on the next platform. And thanks for joining us, really. Tizra Zamchia, your last word from you. You want anything to say?
Yes. No, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really enjoying the contributions. And I've really loved the fact that Richard has come out of his shell, because he was asked, is this endorsed by the party or not? But he's come out of his shell to say he has had tea and water with Mnangagwa and Chiwenga at some point. But I wasn't talking from that perspective. I was talking from the perspective of the public, functions of which we also have videos that are quite public. I'm not also very much disappointed by this input, because what it does is simply to confirm what I've said. All he's saying is that, no, this is not new. I never said it's new. I said my periodization is post-coup. He said this started since the liberation struggle, 1963. I've read struggles within struggles, ethnocentric, approaches to politics. So he's simply saying, let's look at it from a historical perspective, though it's happening. Then about the political thing, that this thing must be classified. I mean, there wouldn't be a reason for us to be researchers if we not be able to bring this out. He didn't challenge any of the circulars that I put. I've given specific dates. I've given specific numbers to those circulars, and I've quoted from those circulars. And then to say that it's based on hearsay, I think it's just being unfair. I think he's just panicked a little bit. He should have challenged the primary documentation. That's why I put it there, the primary documentation. So when we are doing research, we definitely are not doing any kind of legitimation or one part or the other. And perhaps he hasn't read enough of my works. I think if he reads my 2013 article, which now and again always trend, about MDC's Unseeing Eye, published in the Journal of Southern Africa Studies, you'll see that I don't belong to a particular party when I do my analysis. It's quite hard on the MDC, that article. You can go and read, but I don't remember it. I don't think he has capacity even to write to journals of that level. I didn't want to comment on that book. It's an over-exaggerated flyer, which wouldn't pass serious journal review anyway. But thanks very much. But what I'm simply saying is that it's not easy to write. It's good that there's something on the table, and it's good to review it. It's also good to review the MDC. I've done that in 2013. And I think my points still stand to a certain extent. But we can't deny that everything is boiling within the MDC. And as I was quoting, I didn't even quote any MDC person or outsider. I quoted people within ZANU PF. And that's the challenge as far as I see it. There's this dogma, to conclude, of ZANU PF infallibility, which you can equate to the papal dogma of infallibility. But if you look at ZANU PF within the two concepts that I put forward, scope and cohesion, it's not at its best at the moment. What's making it to breathe is because it's part of state, reallocation of resources. So you have a party state. Take away the state from ZANU PF today and tell me whether ZANU PF will survive. It will not survive. ZANU PF must sober up, agree that Zimbabwe needs a serious discussion about how to get out of this quagmire and to treat or cure the military coup. He's sounding like former G40 guys just before the coup who thought that they were very they were in an advantageous position. But after that, they are also now realizing that the coup needs to be treated. We can't even talk of 2023 before curing the military coup. It's a waste of time, both within ZANU PF and from without ZANU PF. It's about Zimbabwe and its citizens. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that last words. I'm here to thank first and foremost the editors of the book, Remembering Mugabe, for the profound work done, the amount of time spent on it, and bring it to fruition. It's here. It's on sale. It's at Surplus, $25. Please buy the book. The publishers are not big publishers. They depend on sales to meet their costs. And secondly, to thank Faye Chung, who came in on board very at short notice. And thanks very much, Faye. It was a difficult way even to regiment you home here. So thanks very much. And of course, Chipo, Miles, and Zamchia. Thank you very much. It gave us the occasion to begin flagging some of the ideas that we have. We are doing a substantive work on ZANU PF, both historical. Some are not too young. We have a fair knowledge of the history, origins of ZANU PF, its period in exile. We have a lot of sources, people like Faye here next to me. And of course, people like Miles Tendi have done tremendous work on the role of the military in ZANU PF. And Zamchia's work is profound work. Even if Richard did well as a party functionary to defend, I think he can't fault the profound research-based, knowledge-based paper that he has presented. You will see our final product in the next few weeks. It will be worth reading. So thank you all. We look forward to the next policy dialogue in 2 weeks' time. Send us your suggestions. We already have one from Miles, maybe to look at the opposition. Although we did look at it a few months ago. It was in a sorry state, to state the least. But that's only one aspect. The MDC Alliance, we have to look at the totality of the opposition in this country. And it is clear in the history of politics in Africa, in particular, but elsewhere, incumbency is a burden, and it's seldom that an incumbent ruling party does win an election in Africa, all being fair and equal. And the Zambian president is not novel at all. One would argue it has happened already in Zimbabwe several times. Were it not for the military, that we could have a different outcome altogether. So thank you. Mikhail, give us our music as we go. Where'd you stay?
I'm not sure why it's not playing.
Yeah.